In 586 BC, the Babylonian army breached the walls of Jerusalem, burned the temple to the ground, and dragged the population into exile. In the book of Jeremiah, this catastrophic fall appears to be the violent climax of the story. It is easy to read this total destruction as the ultimate corrective measure, a brutal, definitive end to centuries of Judean idolatry and rebellion. But the historical record reveals something else. The survivors left standing in the wreckage of Jerusalem immediately resumed the exact behaviors that provoked the judgment in the first place. If the trauma of losing the Promised Land failed to correct their spiritual rebellion, what did the physical exile actually accomplish? And how does the biblical text communicate this failure? The true tragedy of 586 BC is the realization that stripping the people from the land did not strip the sin from the people. The second half of Jeremiah, spanning chapters 26 through 45, is meticulously arranged to highlight this exact problem. This chart maps out a literary device known as the Jehoiakim frame. The author uses a two-panel structure, these two dark pillars, to strictly document the unrelenting disobedience of Judah. The first pillar covers chapters 26 to 35, detailing the leadership rejecting God's warnings before the city fell. The second pillar, chapters 36 to 45, mirrors the sequence, recording their continued rebellion after the fall. The destruction of Jerusalem in 586 BC divides the timeline, but it interrupts nothing about their behavior. Embedded directly in the center of these two pillars of failure is the Book of Consolation, chapters 30 to 33. This section contains the ultimate eschatological promises of Israel's restoration. The author intentionally trapped these soaring promises of future grace right next to the disastrous historical reality of chapters 40 through 43. The structure itself argues a theological point. Physical exile is insufficient. A new covenant is required. To understand the mechanics of this unending exile, we have to map three specific promises from the Book of Consolation against the immediate actions of the survivors. We can examine this by placing the text side by side. On the left, the eschatological promise from chapters 30 to 33. On the right, the historical reality of chapters 40 to 43. The first promise is a second Exodus. God decrees he will gather the scattered exiles, provide grace in the wilderness, and plant them permanently back in the land. This new deliverance is described in terms so magnificent that it would eclipse the memory of their original escape from Egypt. On the right side of our matrix, the reality is entirely different. After a rebel group assassinates the Babylonian-appointed governor of Judah, a military leader named Johanan and his officers panic, terrified of Babylonian retaliation. They ask Jeremiah for guidance, and the prophet delivers an explicit command from God: "Stay in the land and submit to Babylonian authority, and you will be safe." They openly refuse. Johanan and his forces flee the Promised Land. They orchestrate a reverse exodus, dragging the surviving remnant and Jeremiah himself straight back into Egypt. Deuteronomy 28 warned that the ultimate curse for covenant failure would be a return to Egypt in ships. Here, they voluntarily walk right back into the original house of bondage. Instead of a second exodus, the remnant's fear and disobedience reversed centuries of salvation history, placing the nation back at square one. Returning to our matrix, the second promise focuses on leadership. God promises to raise up a righteous branch from the line of David who will execute true justice and break the yoke of foreign oppressors. Looking at the historical reality, the immediate representative of the Davidic royal line after the fall of Jerusalem is a man named Ishmael. Rather than executing justice, Ishmael stages a violent coup. He assassinates Gedaliah, the specific governor Nebuchadnezzar, and by extension, God, had appointed to maintain a remnant of peace in Judah. The biblical narrator goes out of his way to expose this corrupt leadership. He intentionally frames Ishmael's actions to perfectly mirror the ancient, tragic sins of Israel's first failed king, Saul. First, Gedaliah assumes authority at Mizpah. This is the exact location where Saul was first anointed, signaling a regime change that threatens the existing royal line. Second, in an act of profound treachery, Ishmael murders 70 innocent pilgrims traveling from the north. This maps precisely onto Saul's paranoid slaughter of the 85 priests at Nob. Finally, Ishmael takes hostages and is ultimately intercepted and defeated at the Pool of Gibeon. This is the exact site of the deadly skirmish between the armies of David and Saul in 2 Samuel. The Davidic line in 586 BC was entirely corrupt. Through Ishmael, the royal house acts as an enemy to Yahweh's purposes, delaying the arrival of the promised righteous branch. The third and final point on the matrix reveals the root of the issue, the new covenant. Chapter 31 promises a time when God will write the law directly onto the hearts of the people, giving them an internal desire to obey. The post-fall narrative proves this internal transformation has not yet occurred. The survivors commit the exact same sins as the pre-fall kings. The text connects these eras using precise linguistic echoes. Before the fall, corrupt officials throw Jeremiah into a cistern, the Hebrew word bor. After the fall, Ishmael dumps his 70 murdered victims into a cistern, a bor. Before the fall, leaders rejected Jeremiah's message as treason. After the fall, Johanan rejects Jeremiah's prophecy by calling him a liar, using the Hebrew word sheker, the exact technical term used to identify false prophets. The physical trauma of losing their city, their temple, and their freedom did absolutely nothing to alter their internal spiritual condition. This strict narrative parallelism proves that the unending exile is an internal, spiritual problem. Geography and time alone cannot fix the human heart. God's promises in the Book of Consolation are absolute, but the immediate generation completely disqualified themselves from experiencing them. This structural contrast served as a vital, sobering warning to the surviving exiles sitting in Babylon. Physical return to the land is not an automatic guarantee of spiritual restoration. This exact theological tension is picked up decades later in the book of Daniel. In chapter 9, Daniel realizes the 70 years of physical exile prophesied by Jeremiah are coming to an end, but he also recognizes the people's hearts remain unchanged, prompting him to intercede for the nation. God's response to Daniel extends the timeline. It will not be 70 years, but 70 weeks of years before transgression is truly brought to an end and everlasting righteousness is established. The book of Jeremiah leaves its reader in a state of profound theological tension. The physical judgment fell exactly as promised, but the true end of the exile awaits a future eschatological moment, a time when God himself will rewrite the human heart.